Imagine stepping off a plane in an African country that was once described as a symbol of violence, poverty, and ruin. But instead of chaos, the first thing you notice is silence. No trash, no non-stop honking, no guarded stairs. Everything is neat, orderly, and so strange that it makes you wonder, am I really on the continent the world has always told me about? Just 30 years ago, this place was hell. In only 100 days, nearly 1 million people were killed, with machetes, clubs, by the hands of people who had once been their neighbors. The world looked at Rwanda in 1994 and concluded that it was a society that had completely collapsed. No law, no trust, no future. And then the world looked away, but Rwanda did not. Today, Rwanda is ranked among the safest countries in Africa. Its capital, Kigali, is frequently called one of the cleanest cities in the world. Here, plastic bags are completely banned. Littering is not only punished with fines, but can also lead to prison time. Once a month, the entire country almost comes to a stop so people can clean streets, neighborhoods, and drainage systems together. The elderly, the young, officials, and ordinary workers stand in the same line and do the same work. To many Americans, that sounds extreme. We are taught that individual freedom is the foundation of society. But in Rwanda, order seems to come before freedom. And the real question is not how they managed to do it. It is why they chose this path. What makes the story even harder to believe is what happens beneath that calm surface. In remote villages, where women once gave birth at home and often died from hemorrhaging, unmanned flying devices now quietly cut through the air. They do not carry weapons. They do not carry surveillance cameras. They carry blood, medicine, and hope. In many cases, they arrive before the countdown of life reaches zero. This is not a story about a miracle. It is not an advertisement for a new African model. This is the story of a society that went through the worst human beings can do to one another, and decided to rebuild from scratch through discipline, technology, and a level of control that the world still argues about. Rwanda asks an uncomfortable question for countries that are far richer and far freer. If order can save lives, how much are we willing to trade to get it? And if a country once soaked in blood can be reborn like this, what does that say about the beliefs we have always treated as obvious? This story is not only about Rwanda. It is a mirror reflecting the choices every society, sooner or later, must face. 30 years ago, Rwanda did not only lose people, it lost something far harder to rebuild: trust. After 1994, when the genocide ended, this small country was nearly erased from the world's moral map. More than 800,000 people died in 100 days. But what remained afterward was a society where victims and perpetrators were forced to live on the same road, in the same neighborhood, even in the same family. There was no clear line between winners and losers, only a heavy silence. And one question no one dared to answer: how could a country like this continue to exist? In the early years after the genocide, Rwanda looked like a familiar picture of failure. The economy collapsed, infrastructure was shattered, and millions of refugees returned carrying memories that had not healed. International aid arrived, but it came with doubt. Many Western observers believed Rwanda would remain another example of Africa's cycle of violence, where history repeats faster than healing. No one expected order, much less discipline, yet in that very situation, Rwanda made a choice that surprised many other countries. Instead of putting individual freedom first, they chose social order as the first foundation. Not because they did not understand the value of freedom, but because they had seen what happens when a society completely falls apart. For Rwanda, chaos was not an abstract concept. It was a memory that still haunted every family. The first policies sounded small, even trivial: a ban on plastic bags, strict rules on public cleanliness, heavy penalties for littering. But for Rwanda, this was not an environmental story. This was a story of collective discipline. In a society that once watched neighbors kill one another, forcing people to follow very specific, everyday rules became a way to rebuild the feeling of living together. Kigali gradually became different. Streets became so clean it almost unsettled travelers used to the disorderly image of developing cities. There were no spontaneous dumping sites, no plastic bags flying in the wind. Police did not need to be everywhere, because the community itself reminded people. For Americans, this can feel like being controlled. For Rwandans, it is a sign of a society standing upright again. One of the clearest symbols of this choice is Uganda, a community workday held once a month. For a few hours, the whole country almost stops. Shops close. Traffic thins out. From senior officials to poor laborers, everyone joins in cleaning, repairing roads, building schools, clearing drainage canals. On paper, Uganda is called voluntary. In reality, social pressure makes very few people dare to be absent, and this is where the story becomes complicated. For many Western critics, Uganda is a form of collective coercion. They question personal choice, and how far a government has the right to shape citizen behavior. These questions are not wrong, but they often ignore a crucial context. Rwanda did not rebuild from stability. It rebuilt from moral ruin, in a society where law once completely collapsed. Rebuilding the habit of compliance, even the smallest habits, became the first step in preventing history from repeating. In Rwanda, order is not seen as a limitation, but as a protective fence. It is not meant to create perfect citizens, but to stop people from sliding back into the abyss they once fell into. But order only truly matters when it reaches real daily life. And that is when Rwanda entered the second stage of rebuilding. Order as protection for the weakest. In remote rural areas, where roads are dangerous and hospitals are dozens of kilometers away, pregnant women once faced life or death risks simply because they could not get blood in time when hemorrhaging happened. For years, death here was not a surprise. It was accepted as part of fate. Rwanda refused to accept that. Instead of waiting for a perfect healthcare system, they deployed solutions that sounded like science fiction. Unmanned drones were used to deliver blood and medicine to distant clinics. When an emergency is reported, within minutes a drone can leave a distribution center, fly across hills and mountains, and drop supplies at the exact needed location. No traffic jams, no delays, no bargaining with time. For many Americans, this technology impresses because it is innovative. But for Rwandans, its value is much simpler. It saves lives. And when you have lived in a society where life was treated cheaply, any system that protects it is treasured. Here the picture of Rwanda begins to challenge familiar assumptions. This is not a country imposing order only to control. This is a society using order as a foundation to run solutions that could not work without collective discipline. Still, the questions remain. Can order last without becoming a burden? Can a society built on high discipline keep room for disagreement, creativity, and individual freedom? Rwanda has not provided a final answer, but that silence is exactly why this story deserves to continue, because Rwanda is not a conclusion. It is an experiment still in progress, and in the next part, we will look deep beneath the clean and peaceful surface, where success and contradiction exist together, and where the cost of order begins to show. One of the first things that confuses many Western visitors is the nearly absolute sense of order in public life. In Kigali, you rarely see loud arguments, rarely see spontaneous protests, rarely see the familiar forms of resistance common in liberal democracies. Everything runs so smoothly that it creates a feeling that is both reassuring and hard to define. Reassuring because there is no chaos. Hard to define because that quiet does not feel like natural peace. It feels like an order maintained through silent agreement. Rwandans rarely speak directly about politics with strangers, not because they lack opinions, but because they understand the consequences of words in a society that once collapsed through hateful speech. After 1994, Rwanda treated speech as a weapon, and like any weapon, it is tightly managed. Laws against incitement and ethnic division are enforced strictly. In theory, this is meant to prevent tragedy from returning. In practice, it also creates a space where the line between protection and control can sometimes become blurry. For an American audience, where free speech is treated as sacred, this raises a hard question. If a society was destroyed by words, Is limiting speech a step backward? Or a form of self-defense? Rwanda chose the second. And so far, that choice seems to have helped them avoid a new spiral of violence. But it also means disagreement rarely appears in public. This control is not only about speech, but about how the state is present at every level of life. Local authorities know communities and families closely. This helps them respond quickly to disease outbreaks, poverty, and social welfare problems. But it also makes many people feel they are always seen, always noted, both in positive and negative ways. In Rwanda, you are rarely an anonymous individual. One area often praised is the role of women. Rwanda has one of the highest rates of women in parliament in the world. Women are strongly present in government, business, and civil organizations. After the genocide, when many men were killed or fled, women carried the burden of rebuilding communities. That created a shift in roles unlike anything in this country's history, but even this success has deeper layers. The presence of women in Rwandan politics is not only the result of a gender equality movement, but also part of a strategy for social stability. Women are seen as less likely to turn toward violence, less likely to be pulled into older ethnic conflicts. Empowering them is both progressive and practical. And this mix is exactly what makes Rwanda hard to reduce into a simple ideal model. Looking at the economy, Rwanda is often praised as one of the fastest growing and most stable countries in the region. But growth here does not come from heavy industry or massive natural resources. It comes from services, tourism, technology, and a tightly organized state system. Kigali is carefully planned. Building is strictly controlled, and there are no rapidly expanding slums beyond control like in many other African capitals. However, that neatness also means not everyone has a place. The poorest people, the ones who do not fit the image of a modern Rwanda, are sometimes pushed out of the city center. Cleanliness has a cost, and that cost is often paid by those with the least voice. What matters is that Rwandans understand these contradictions very well. They are not naive about the system they live in, but they also carry a collective memory that makes their priorities different from many other societies. When you have seen neighbors turn and kill each other, the greatest desire is no longer self-expression, but making sure it never happens again. That is why many Rwandans accept a high level of control as a reasonable price for stability. For them, order is not a political concept. It is a condition of survival. This does not mean they do not want more freedom, but they want it to come slowly, within a framework, rather than exploding and bringing risk. From an American viewer's perspective, Rwanda can look like a living paradox. A safe society, but not loudly free. A clean country, but maintained through strict discipline. A success story, but always followed by questions about the price paid. And that is where Rwanda becomes an uncomfortable mirror. It forces us to face a hard truth. Values we call universal are always shaped by context. Freedom, order, safety, creativity do not always move together. Sometimes, to preserve one thing, a society must sacrifice part of another. Rwanda does not ask the world to copy them. They do not present themselves as paradise. They are simply living with their choice, day by day, policy by policy, through silence that is intentional. And when you look closely at what they have built, the question is no longer whether Rwanda is right or wrong. The question is, in a similar situation, would we have the courage to choose differently, and live with the consequences? In the next part, we will go one step further, looking at how Rwanda is seen from the outside, how the world praises, doubts, and sometimes misunderstands their story, so we can better understand why this small country remains so controversial on the global map. From the outside, Rwanda is often told in two completely different voices. One voice praises, almost admires. The other is cautious, suspicious, even wary. And this contrast is exactly what makes Rwanda one of the most discussed countries in contemporary Africa. Even though its land and population are far smaller than many more familiar names, in international forums, Rwanda often appears as a rare success story. Development reports emphasize steady growth, high safety, strong governance, and the ability to deploy technology quickly. International financial institutions see Rwanda as a model of administrative reform and effective use of aid. For many Western policymakers, this is proof that an African country can escape instability if it has decisive leadership and a strong enough state. Rwanda actively nurtures that image. International conferences and events in Kigali are organized with high professionalism. The airport is clean, the streets are neat, and the security makes foreign delegations feel safe. Tourism is promoted as high-end eco-travel, with famous gorilla reserves and tightly managed nature experiences. Rwanda does not sell chaos. It sells a feeling of safety and order, but at the same time, another voice exists alongside it. Human rights groups question the limited political space, the near absence of independent opposition, and the self-censorship of journalists and critics. To them, Rwanda is an example of an efficient state that lacks mechanisms to restrain power from below. Stability is maintained, but how, and at what cost, is not always openly discussed. What is striking is that these two voices rarely speak directly to each other. Those who praise Rwanda often see criticism as insensitive to the post-genocide context. Those who criticize argue that economic success cannot justify overlooking human rights issues. Rwanda, in this role, becomes a dividing mirror. It does not allow observers to hold a comfortable neutral position. For an American audience, this is especially worth thinking about. The U.S. has long been used to judging other countries through the lens of liberal democracy, competitive elections, and independent media. Rwanda does not fully fit that template, but it also has not fallen into chaos, civil war, or state collapse the way many once predicted. That reality forces outsiders to confront an uncomfortable question: are there more paths to stability than we thought? International aid is a major part of this story. Rwanda has received significant aid for many years, but the way it uses it differs from many other countries. Instead of allowing scattered projects, it integrates aid into a national strategy and requires foreign organizations to follow domestic priorities. This creates higher efficiency, but it also makes Rwanda less dependent on outside political pressure. When you do not have to beg, you have more room to set conditions. That confidence is sometimes misunderstood as toughness, even arrogance. Rwanda is willing to confront diplomatically when it feels sovereignty is threatened. It is not afraid to say no to demands it believes do not fit its domestic context. For a country that was abandoned in the darkest moment of its history, that memory is still vivid, and it directly shapes how Rwanda sees the outside world. Regionally, Rwanda is not a passive actor either. Its role in security and peacekeeping makes neighboring countries both respect and watch it carefully. Rwanda presents itself as a nation that learned the painful lesson of state collapse, and therefore refuses to accept prolonged instability around it. But to critics, this policy sometimes crosses the line between protection and intervention. The differences in how Rwanda is viewed reveal more than just this one country. They reflect shifts in global order, where development models are no longer owned by the West. Rwanda does not try to copy a single existing model. It selects, adapts, and sometimes goes against familiar advice. That makes it unpredictable, but also hard to dismiss. More importantly, Rwandans are not building their country to please the world. They are building to address their greatest fear, the return of violence. Every policy, from environmental management to speech control, fits inside that frame. Once you understand this, outsiders may disagree, but it is hard to deny the consistency of their choices. Rwanda therefore exists as an open question, not a perfect model to copy, and not a case to condemn with simple slogans. It is proof that history can leave scars so deep they shape a nation's future. And those scars do not disappear just because of economic growth or clean streets. In Rwanda, the first thing you notice is a slow, orderly rhythm of life, not a sluggish stagnation, but a sense that everything happens in the right place, at the right time. People line up, wait, follow traffic rules even when no police are present. Children wear tidy uniforms to school. Neighborhoods are rarely noisy after a certain hour in the evening. To outsiders, this feels safe. To insiders, It creates a living space that can be predicted. That predictability brings a value Rwandans deeply treasure: peace of mind. After a history where violence could erupt because of a single word, knowing tomorrow will not be too different from today is a kind of deep comfort. Rwandans are not always happy in the sense of constant joy, but they are less likely to live with the constant fear that order could collapse at any moment. Yet that peace of mind comes with invisible limits. Many people learn to speak less, to be more careful, especially about politics or sensitive topics. Deeper conversations often happen in private spaces, between people who have known each other for a long time. For the younger generation, those who grew up after 1994, this is not necessarily fear, but a social habit passed down. They learn to adapt to the system rather than confront it. Education plays a major role in shaping this generation. Rwanda invests heavily in schools, information technology, and practical skills. The message is clear: the future is not in endlessly arguing about the past, but in building capacity for the present. Children are taught about the genocide, but in a tightly controlled way, emphasizing unity and collective responsibility more than division. This reduces the risk of hatred returning, but it also makes historical memory a story told within a defined framework. In economic life, many Rwandans accept that opportunity does not come from breaking the rules, but from following them. Small businesses grow within clear limits. Low-level corruption is better controlled than in many countries in the region, not because it disappears completely, but because the cost of violating rules becomes too high. This creates an environment where people know what they can and cannot do, reducing the uncertainty that is the greatest enemy of the poor. But not everyone benefits equally. People in remote rural areas, those who cannot keep up with the pace of development, sometimes feel they exist on the edge of the success story. Their silence is not always satisfaction. Sometimes it is simply the feeling that there is no better option. In a society that prizes stability, public expression of discontent is not a common path. What stands out is that Rwandans usually do not compare their lives to Western democracies. Their measure is different. They compare the present to their own past, and by that measure, the present almost always wins. When the past was chaos, violence, and fear, then order, even strict order, is progress. That is why many Rwandans see their system as a stage, not a final destination. They believe high order is necessary in a period of recovery, but it does not have to remain at that level forever. This belief is not expressed through slogans, but through patience for a future where society is strong enough to loosen control without fearing collapse. From an American audience's perspective, this challenges our thinking. We are used to seeing freedom as the starting point and order as the result. Rwanda reverses that sequence. They build order first, hoping freedom will come later. Nothing guarantees this strategy will succeed over the long term, but up to now, it has helped them avoid the worst. The final question is not whether Rwanda is right. The question is what we learn from a society choosing a path different from what we treat as obvious. Rwanda reminds the world that values do not exist in a vacuum. They are shaped by collective memory, by fear, by losses that are never fully forgotten. For Rwandans, order is not an abstract idea in a textbook. It is what allows them to send children to school without fear, open a shop without fearing looting, fall asleep each night without hearing gunfire. In that context, the limits they accept become easier to understand, even if they do not have to be agreed with. And as this Rwanda story closes here, what remains is not a call to copy or to oppose. What remains is a quiet question for every society facing its own difficult choices. If you have ever seen the bottom of collapse, what would you build the future with first, freedom or order?